recorded. Here we go. So chapter 12, page 147, section 5. The Beinani's mind control, the control that the Beinani has starting with his mind. Nevertheless, in the case of his desire for something forbidden, it does not cross his mind to actually violate the prohibition or to fail to observe a positive commandment, God forbid. Rather, they remain as mere thoughts of sin, which are worse than sinning itself. The Beinani cannot stop thoughts of sin from popping into his mind, even though the notion of actually transgressing is far from him. And even when such thoughts do arise, he quickly pushes them out of his mind. It's an incredible power that we have, that thoughts of sin, thoughts of something inappropriate, thoughts of fantasy and desire that we know we should not be having, sometimes pop up. But the Beinani is strong that they're able to push it aside and realize that's not right for me to be doing. And right away, how do you stop your thoughts? Your thoughts are a continuous cycle. You can't stop thinking, but you could stop what you're thinking about. So instead of thinking about this, I'm going to turn my attention to think about something else. And in that way, you could actually control your thoughts. So even though I'm not stopping the pop-up, because that's from the soul that has an animal soul that's popping it up, I could control if I'm letting it in or not. These thoughts can cross his mind, leading to a distraction from Torah and worship. As the sages of blessed memory taught, each day there are 3 sins from which a man cannot save himself. Thoughts of sin, failure to concentrate during prayer, etc. Actually, the third one, let me read the next paragraph. I think this is a very powerful paragraph, and then I'll explain all of this. The Tanya does not cite the Talmud's third example. Could anyone guess what the third one would be without reading it inside? What's something that every day we struggle with, and it's so hard to stop ourselves from? So the Talmud says it's borderline slander. Slander is something when we're speaking inappropriately about another person, to another person. So borderline slander. Since this is an activity of speech, a faculty over which the Beinani has indeed achieved full mastery. But sinful and distracting thoughts will still pop up into his head, both during the day and sometimes during prayer. For while the Beinani does pray with fervor, arousing love for God, he will have momentary lapses too. So just to explain, we've just learned a very powerful 2 paragraphs. There are certain things that every day we struggle with. There are certain things that it's not a struggle every day. For some, cheating in money is not a struggle for them. They're honest, they have integrity, they keep their word. That's not a struggle. But something that we all struggle with is certain fantasies and desires that just come up, and everyone knows to themselves what they are. And not necessarily is it the worst one in the book, but things that are forbidden to think about. Thoughts of negativity of oneself, a fear and anxiety. While those could be natural, it's something that you have to work on yourself, and it's unavoidable. That's what the Talmud is saying. That is something we think about every day. We have to learn how to control it. The third one, I think, is a very telling one, is slander. It's something that either you're speaking it or you're at least thinking of this person. You're by a red light, and that person is trying to cut me off. Whatever it is, and you're telling that over to someone. That's something we fail. That we struggle with, and a Beinani is someone that we're working on these struggles. And even during prayer, which is really supposed to be a spiritual oasis, an island of time that you're uninterrupted, and your animal soul is leaving you alone, even during those times, there could be lapses. Let's see the practical lesson on the side, as we're about to see it inside. I love the practical lessons, which are the bars on the side. Let's see. Who is, all right. Robin, do you want to read that practical lesson on 148?
When you recite the Shema and pray, if you meditate to the point that you get excited about God, that energy will help you exert your willpower for the good during the rest of the day.
Amazing. So Shema, and really in prayer in general, if you feel a connection with God, if you feel, and it's a meditation, that God is all over, and yet God cares about me. God wants a relationship with me. And God feels the need of me doing good in the world. It will get you excited about a relationship. And that will carry you through the day. And the Beinoni is relying on these moments of excitement to stand by him during difficult times. Just to digress a story, we know there's a big debate between two of the famous brothers in the Torah, is Moses and Aaron. There was different brother relationships in the Torah that weren't as loving. Take, for example, Joseph and his brothers. They threw him under a bus and sold him as a slave. Cain and Abel, the first set of brothers. Cain killed Abel. Isaac and Esav, Yaakov and Esav, Jacob and Esau, they also didn't really get along, but Moshe and Aaron did. One of the big fights they had is, what do we do? Are we allowed to ever tell a white lie? A white lie is when I'm driving on a rainy day and there's an old lady sitting by a bus stop, and I pull over and say, come. And she's like, no, I'm going in the opposite direction. And I lie and I say, I'm going there also. I'm going exactly where you're going. Is that allowed? Moshe clearly said it's not. Because we know an Israeli song is Moshe Emet, the Torato Emet. I'm not going to sing it for you because I don't want you to tune out already now, but with my singing. But Moshe Emet, the Torato Emet means Moshe is truth and his Torah is the true Torah. So Moshe stood for truth. Truth, there's no place for any lies at all. It's true. True is you stay strong, you stay committed, you stay truthful. Right? An honest person, he's not honest 6 days of the week and lying one day of the week. That's not an honest person. You're honest all the way through. An honest relationship is you're honest with the other person all the way through. You're not honest sometimes. Aaron, on the other hand, his older brother, disagreed. And he says, no, a white lie is actually not only kosher, but if it's the sake of peace in the home, a white lie is appropriate. If it's to bring peace. So when your spouse is asking you, do I look fat? Or whatever it is, you say you're the most beautiful person. And if you should feel that, and you should think that, and you have to get yourself there. But my point is, you have to know how to make peace in a home. So how did I bring in this peace in a home? So Aaron, he would allow white lies to bring relationships together. So if there was a fight in a marriage, he would go to the husband and to the wife, and he would tell the wife, I want you to know that your husband feels so bad for what he says. He wishes he could apologize and wishes you would take him back. And she was like, oh, sure. If he finally agrees that what he did was wrong and he wants to apologize, I want in. And then he would go to the husband and do the same thing. And he would bring marriages together. He would bring friendships together, fractured friendships. He would put back together. And one of the things Aaron was famous for is, even if there was a guy that was no good, to say it quite frankly, a guy that was robbing banks and he didn't have any good side to him, Aaron would still befriend him. And Aaron would say, and meet them on the street and say, you're such a special person. You have such great power and potential. What it would do is, to this person walking down the street about to do something inappropriate, the guy would think, Aaron looks at me with such high regard. How could I let him down? How could I do what I'm about to be doing? And he would hold off on it. And then Aaron would see him the next day and again compliment him. Aaron would bring people to a higher place by nurturing their good side. The reason why I know the story, is there was I don't know if he was a Chabad rabbi, but he was a teacher, a Chabad teacher in Brooklyn, actually in Brownsville section of Brooklyn, which there was a lot of immigrants, a lot of Jewish people living there in the 50s. There was a teacher that one of the students, this was Shabbos, and he had a bunch of yeshiva boys. And one of the things we don't do is we don't smoke on Shabbos. I mean, we shouldn't smoke at all. But in the 50s, smoking was a lot more normal. I don't even think there was a smoking age. I don't know. But someone could correct me. But I'm pretty sure maybe you did. I don't know. If you had to be 18 to buy cigarettes, I don't know. But there was yeshiva boys who were smoking. It was a very common thing. And this boy was basically smoking on Shabbos. So the teacher wanted to kick him out, saying that's a bad influence for everyone else around you. That's not how we act over here. So he wrote to the Rebbe asking permission. Are you okay if I send out this yeshiva boy because he's doing things that are not allowed. And the Rebbe just quoted him this story of Aaron, basically saying for a person who's doing things that are not allowed, you have to befriend them even more. You have to become an even closer friend so that they look at themselves with greater regard, saying, I can't let my teacher down. And he did it, and this young fellow actually grew in his Judaism and in his kindness, and became a rabbi, and he had a beautiful future. But it really came as a result of realizing and nurturing the goodness within another. And we certainly have to do this within ourselves. So if we look at ourselves and say, God is looking out for me, God is asking for a relationship with me, the Shema prayer allows you to fuel the rest of your day with that excitement and say, wow, I'm in a relationship with God. I can't let him down. And that's a meditation that we each need to have. I gave you some of the of my own 2 cents on there, but it's the idea of realizing that I'm in a relationship and God wants me and God is caring for me. And I don't want to be disconnected from him even for a moment. Okay, let's continue now on 148 in the middle. So so thank you, Robin, for that practical lesson. That was really nice. How can the Beinoni successfully deflect all of his negative urges? Let's face it, we have them. How could I avoid them? How could I push them away? How could I deflect them? We know that it is possible since the brain rules over the heart, but the brain only overcomes the heart by sheer willpower. As we learned above, any person can, with the willpower of his brain, restrain himself and take control of his heart's urges. But how does a Beinoni muster enough willpower to control every urge of his heart? How do I have the power to keep it going? So here's a beautiful explanation, again, foundation of Tanya. Rather, for this purpose of ensuring that the mind rules over the heart on every occasion, the Beinoni benefits from the residual effects of meditative prayers in his brain that linger after the prayers are completed. The Beinoni has lost the intense experience of meditative prayer, which temporarily whitewashed all urges of self-gratification. And he has returned to his default state, where urges do rise from his heart to his mind. Nevertheless, there are some after effects, residual effects of prayer of the mind during the rest of the day. Urges continue to rise from his heart, as if he had not prayed at all. But the residual effects of prayer on the brain do sharpen its abilities to successfully rule over the heart. So the example I gave last week, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, was the fire that the Beinoni has in his home to warm his house. That this is before heaters and central air. They would use logs from outside to heat up their home. But a lot of people that didn't have enough logs, they would use the fuel of the morning that they would use to warm up their home. It would have to last them until the night, until they would refuel it. And that fuel had to be enough so they wouldn't open their windows, even though it was very hot in the morning. They needed to retain that heat in order to keep the residual effects for when it's cold in the house. On the same note, the Beinoni has the spiritual ecstasy, the high experience, the riding the wave during prayer, but he needs to carry that fuel, that warmth, as a residual effect for when inappropriate things come up during the day, and he's not in the middle of prayer. So he has that residual effect that keeps his mind mastering over the heart. It's like the example I gave of the wave that he's sometimes on a wave and he feels high, but then he's not on a wave anymore, and it could be boring. And he could say, "I want out. I'm going back to the shore." But what keeps him in the water? The excitement of how good that wave felt, and waiting for the next wave to come. So the Beinoni is relying on his meditation of prayer, even when he's not in prayer, to keep him up, to keep him or her going during the more difficult challenges of the day. The residual effect of prayer are sufficient to stimulate his innate reverence of God and love of God, which remain hidden in the right chamber of his heart, so that whenever the Beinoni feels a desire for self-gratification, he's having a feeling of weakness. He wants to just satisfy his own wants, self-gratification. He will be strong and triumph. He will override over this evil, preventing it from gaining control and dominance over his body, which is the small city, like the kingdom that we were talking about before in chapter 9, and from bringing its desire to fruition. to influence the limbs of his body. So each and every one of us have that power to control. One of the most incredible stories, and if you stick around long enough, God willing, when my son in 4 years, I'll have a bar mitzvah. His name is Yosef. One of my favorite characters in the Torah is Joseph. He's my favorite character because he struggled. It wasn't all easy. He was a servant, a slave in Egypt alone after his brothers threw him under the bus. And there was a time when he was ready to give in and relent. And there was his boss's wife wanted to have intimate relations with him. And he was ready to give in. The Torah says he was ready to succumb. And at the last moment, he had an image of his father coming to him and saying, how could you? You're mine. You're part of our Jewish people. You can't trip like this. And it says he mustered every fiber of his energy together, and he was able to force it out. He was able to control himself, and he ran out. I imagine how hard that is. And that could be in an inappropriate relationship, or that could be in money. It's so tempting to cheat the decimal on this side or on that side and make an extra couple dollars. And it seems so good. And you're able to muster your courage to fight it off. That's what the Beinoni does. So there's self-gratification feelings that come up, but he pushes it away, and he knows it's wrong, and he has the dominance of his mind over his body. The residual effects of love and reverence of God during prayer help the Beinoni later in the day, not only with his inner struggle against speaking or doing something inappropriate, but also in his particularly challenging war against sinful thoughts. So it's not only about speaking and doing, but he has a war with his thoughts, and the Beinoni has that love and reverence, that awe and respect for God that still has its residual effect from prayer that's able to keep him going. Let's see. Vivian, are you able to read 149, the practical lesson, that sidebar?
Sure. Okay. So in addition to total control over your behavior, you also have a large degree of control over your thoughts. You cannot stop inappropriate thoughts from entering your mind, but as soon as you become aware of them, you can choose to divert your mind to different thoughts.
Thank you, Vivian. You could live on this little lesson that you could divert your thoughts. A person says, I couldn't help myself. I couldn't stop myself from thinking this. You could. How? By thinking of diverting your thoughts, and you have that control. I find that to be beautiful and powerful. Thank you. I'm not going to continue talking about it because we've been speaking about it for several chapters already, but it never ceases to amaze me how we all have that power, and we just have to unleash it. Thank you. We're back in the middle of 149, and the residual effects of prayer help the Beinoni not to sin even in the mind alone, to have bad thoughts. Because evil in the left side of the Beinoni's heart does not have the control nor dominance to overcome the willpower of his brain to make him contemplate such thoughts, God forbid. As we have seen, the evil on the left side of the Beinoni's heart is sufficient to cause bad thoughts to pop into the Beinoni's head. That's a fact. He has an animal soul inside of him that has wants and desires, and those pop up. But it is not powerful enough to overcome the willpower in the Beinoni's mind, which chooses not to dwell upon such thoughts. So the thoughts come up, but the Beinoni's choice is not to dwell on it, to move past it, to ignore it, to X out of it, to divert his thoughts, as Vivian said. It stops him from willingly embracing this bad thought, God forbid, which has been involuntarily, which has risen involuntarily from his heart to his brain, as mentioned above on page 142. Rather, and this is exciting, we're going to be finishing chapter 12, and then I'll give a synopsis on chapter 13 for next class. Great. Rather, as soon as the bad thought reaches his mind, he dismisses it vigorously with two hands. He pushes it away. As soon as he realizes that it is a bad thought, he averts his mind from it and thinks about something else. And he refuses to willingly embrace the thought, not even to fantasize about it deliberately, and certainly not to consider actually doing it, God forbid, or even to talk about it. So he's able to willfully push it out and not let it in. For someone who deliberately fantasizes is classified as a rasha at that moment. So someone who welcomes in these negative thoughts about themselves or about another or about a fantasy, etc., At that moment, they're weak. They're letting a thought in. They're compromised. They're compromising on their commitment. So even if it's just for a moment, but at that moment they're called a Rasha because they are giving in. They're weak. And as we have learned at the beginning of this chapter, the Beinoni never allows himself to become a Rasha even for a single moment. So the Beinoni's self-control extends over both his personal religiosity, and this is the best part of the chapter, I think, and his behavior towards others. Till now, we were speaking about the relationship that is existing between the person, he or her, and God. So he never has a negative fantasy, a thought. But now the same is true about his relationship, his interpersonal relationship with others. Listen to these beautiful words. And in human relationships, the Beinoni exhibits complete self-control. As soon as the thought of ill will or hatred, God forbid, rises from his heart to his mind, or any thoughts of envy, anger, or resentment, etc., he categorically refuses to embrace those thoughts in his mind or with his will. So he has a feeling of anger. Anger comes from the heart, and it's rising up. It's going to his mind. He pushes it away. Envy, ill will, hatred, all these things, ego, he pushes it away. However, in this case, it is not sufficient for the Beinoni to merely repress his negative thought. He also needs to act in a contrary fashion. So this is beautiful. It's not enough to just ignore it because it's going to come right back. You have to actually act contrary to what your heart is trying to get you to be inappropriate in. So that's the bottom of 150. On the contrary, it is his mind that controls and dominates the inclination of his heart to do the exact opposite, to act in a kind way towards the individual, showing him extra affection. Ladies and gentlemen, this is so hard to do. Someone who's driving you crazy, you're going to be extra patient with him. Someone who you can't stand, you're going to be extra kind and loving to. That's how you win over the battle of your animal soul. Your animal soul is telling you, lash out at him, get back at him, whatever. And your godly soul has to have the control to say, no, I'm going to be extra patient. That's how you strengthen that weaker side. It's such a beautiful line. Even if another person acts abominably, the self-mastery of the Beinoni demands a positive, loving response, devoid of any anger or resentment. So this may sound, in Yiddish there's a term, a shmata. Shmata is being treated like a rag. Over here, if I'm understanding correctly, it's not telling you to be treated like a rag. If a person is bullying you, you're not allowed to be bullied. If a person is doing something forbidden, you're not allowed to say, oh, I'm going to be a Beinoni and let them do it. No, you're not supposed to. You're not allowed to. You have to have the chutzpah to stand up for yourself, right? But that's also part of being the Beinoni. But over here, just to make it clear, and anyone, if they have questions on this and thoughts on it, but if someone is acting annoying to you, you can either say, I don't want to talk to you again, or you could say, no, let me have the patience to understand them and explain it to them. And I think that's what over here is talking about. You're not going to have any anger or resentment. So meaning, even if, let me even take this a step further, even if it's an unhealthy relationship and I have to break it off, I'm just speaking a little bit on my own over here, even if I'm not going to call them, but I'm not going to bear resentment against them. Meaning I can't put myself in a situation where, God forbid, I could get hurt in a relationship, but not necessarily am I going to harbor anger, animosity, and resentment towards that person. I'm still going to have a loving feeling towards them. I just know it's better for me not to reach out to them at this point. That's a little bit of my own commentary. We'll see how we go inside over here. And anyone could share their thoughts on that. But is there any limit to the degradation of the Beinoni is required to suffer before seeking some retribution? So let's see how the Tanya words this out. He should tolerate, we're on the bottom line of 150. He should tolerate the antagonist to extreme limits without becoming angry, God forbid. And also to refrain from repaying the antagonist his just, I think it's supposed to be his just deserves. I'm not sure. Meaning you should refrain from revenge, right? Refrain from paying back, even for the sake of justice and not out of anger, for this would be, this would, I think it's an added word, for this would violate the prohibition not to take revenge nor bear a grudge against the members of your people, which is a commandment in the Torah, Leviticus, God forbid. Rather, on the contrary, repay the guilty with positive acts. And that's actually from the liturgy, Birkat HaGomel. So this is such a hard thing, and it's you need to meditate on this. For everyone watching now or the recording, so it's absolutely powerful that someone who is getting on your nerves, and you're going to be extra kind to them. So let's see how we words that over here, and we'll give our own thoughts on it. You are the worst judge if someone has wronged you. So this is definitely a discussion, and we have to be careful how to word this. So let's first see what the Tanya says about it, and then we'll give our own commentary. And everyone, we have some very wise people on our call, so everyone could definitely chime in. But you are the worst judge if someone has wronged you, since personal bias is so strong. But if you could be genuinely assured that somebody had been unfair to you or caused you harm, wouldn't a measured response be appropriate? So let's see the answer. If somebody wronged you, that misfortune was meant to happen to you, regardless of who perpetrated it. Your antagonist happened to volunteer for the job. But if he would not have done so, God would have found another willing agent to do his work. For reasons that you probably can't fathom, that perceived misfortune was a necessary experience for the evolution of your soul. As the sages put it, everything that God does is for the good. So ironically, you should be grateful to your antagonist for sending you an experience which was valuable to you. Of course, that was not the antagonist's intention, but if somebody really helps you, you ought to repay them for the real value of their actions and not their motives. Wow. And the example we're going to see is from Joseph. Let's start with Joseph, and then let's understand this. Because this, if you could master this paragraph, you're the nicest person I ever met. How is that so? Let's take Joseph. Joseph had 11 brothers. 10 of them, everyone besides for his younger brother Benjamin, sold him as a slave. They were all part of it. Some of them even wanted to kill him. And instead they said, let's be a little nice to him, and we'll just sell him for 20 silver coins, a pair of shoes. And he went down to Egypt. They didn't talk to him for years. And now finally they come down to Egypt. After a long story in Genesis, the coolest story, he finally reveals himself. A man with a long beard, viceroy of Egypt, in his late 30s, says, I'm Joseph. You sold me as a slave some 22 years ago as a 17-year-old, and now he's 39, viceroy of Egypt, and his brothers are like, oh, you're our brother. I'm so sorry for what we did. And Joseph says, don't worry. It wasn't even you that did it to me. It was God. God wanted this to happen because, look, there's a hunger in the land. And if I wouldn't have ended up in Egypt and ended up in the dungeon, I wouldn't have risen to become the viceroy. And then I wouldn't have been able to take care of our family. And hindsight is 2020. Thanks to that story, the Jewish people became a great nation with millions of us. But it all started with the brothers' evil intention of throwing and selling their brother as a slave. So Joseph's response was, I actually need to thank you for what you did, for selling me, because look, I was able to support our family and keep our father alive during the time of hunger and raise my children. To explain that, I'm a little baffled over here, because to work on yourself, for everyone that's listening to this is such an incredible task of the Beinoni, that someone is antagonizing you. And if it's illegal what they're doing, you of course have to go to the authorities, or you have to make sure that they stop doing what they're doing. But you actually have to kind of be thankful for what that person did to you. Why? Because everything is coming from Hashem. Meaning whatever happens to you is not some fluke and accident or coincidence. Both good, and God forbid even what doesn't seem good, is coming from Hashem. God didn't forget about you. It's all part of a master plan. How this is good, I have no idea. You have no idea. And hopefully we'll understand it very soon. But what we do know is that person that did the ill to you, it's not really them doing it. It's God. But that person is wrong because they chose the job. They said, I want to be the one to act on this. They don't know the bigger plan. They just, they want to do something mean. But I'll just give you an example. Thank God now we own our home the bank owns our home, but we bought a home some 4.5 years ago. And at the time, we were living in our nice home. Many of you have been to our old home. And our landlord was a really nice guy. And he was actually a retired minister that moved to Australia. And for capital gains reasons, he needed to sell his home. And we were living in the home, we were renting. So he even offered us to buy the home. He's like, Rabbi, we love you. You could buy the home. But they needed to sell. It wasn't the right home for us, so we needed to move. My wife was 9 months pregnant. It was not something that I could have written up to move at that time. But a friend of mine, and at the time, I couldn't stand what he said. But my friend told me, Menachem, this is the best thing that's happening to you. You're going to buy him a bouquet of flowers. And I was like, his name is Daiber. I was like, what are you talking about? I have to move my family. I don't even know where I'm going yet. And he was saying, somehow this is the best plan. And you're going to thank him for it. And it worked out the best way. And I think I'm blessed that we're able to see the blessing in it. Most of the times we don't see the blessing in something ill that is happening to us. But the story over here, the point over here is when, by the way, that person's intention wasn't even evil. The landlord was a nice guy. But in general, over here, just to put that back in our context, when a person is acting ill towards you, you have to show them even more kindness. Because it's not even them. I mean, they chose to do it and that's wrong. But it's really coming from Hashem. That person volunteered for the job, but you're going to repay the guilty with positive acts. We could linger on this more, and I want to end the class with just finishing the paragraphs and the practical lesson, and definitely open it up because I'm sure some of you have what to say on this or questions on it. But let's see these last 3 paragraphs, and then we'll open it up. As stated in the Zohar, we should learn from Joseph and the way he treated his brothers. When Joseph revealed his identity to his brothers, he said, these are the words from Genesis, don't be upset or angry with yourselves that you sold me to this place. For God sent me ahead of you to ensure your survival in the land. So thank you for selling me, he's telling them. In most cases, we can't fathom why misfortunes happen to us. And we are required to exercise our faith in divine providence. But from the case of Joseph and his brothers, we see an overt example how even when our eyes perceive only human brutality, providence is judiciously at work. The Tanya stresses that we ought to learn from Joseph and his brothers and act kindly towards all our antagonists in every situation, because this biblical example of Joseph is a model for all human interaction. Let's read this practical lesson. I'm sure some of you have what to share on it. Would anyone like to volunteer if you have the book in front of you? Let's see, Maddie, I don't know, do you have the book yet? I'm not sure if you have the book. I would love for you to read. If not, of course, to listen.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I could hear you. Do you have the book?
Oh, I wish I had the book. I don't have it, so I can't read. I'm so
sorry. Okay, no problem. What do you think of this lesson so far?
I'm absolutely loving it, and I really, really agree with it because I've been in a similar situation, and I've always been of the mindset that every cloud has a silver lining, and that there's a gift for every single problem that we have in our lives. So I really relate to this whole part, and I love it.
Thank you. And I can't take the credit. It's definitely from the Tanya, but how hard is this, Maddie, to practice? Not only there's a silver lining and I'm going to have faith, but over here it's saying it's actually go to the guy that's driving you crazy and give him a hug and a kiss and say, thank you. Dance in front of his house and say, thanks to you, I'm able to, it's like a whole new level. And I think
I was going to say, it's incredibly challenging while it's happening. In my own experience, I went through a whole array of emotions and ups and downs and trying to figure it out and deal with this person in lots of different ways.
Yeah.
But in hindsight afterwards, that's when I came to the conclusion, after the hurt and the pain, then I was like, oh, okay, thank you. Thank you for making me stronger.
Amazing. Wow. And so let's see this practical lesson. Let's see. Shira, I'm assuming, Shira, you're at work, so I'm not sure if you have the book with you. So, and I'll give you 5 seconds. Okay, so we'll go to Robin. You want to read that practical lesson over there?
Sure, thank you. If someone is mean or hurtful to you, remember that this is only happening because God felt that it would be helpful for the evolution of your soul.
Wow.
Never seek revenge against people that hurt you. Actually, you should be nice to them because despite their malicious intent, they have really helped you. Either they have caused you to learn an important lesson or they have done something that will benefit you later on. I'll tell you, I have taken revenge on people. And
We all have. Though
yeah,
almost a reflex, yeah.
and I have, and some of them were just really sweet. I mean, really sweet. And even now, years later, I think of what a particular person did to me, and it wasn't anyway, I didn't know about Tanya then, and I'm not too sure I would even, I would change my behavior if certain things happened to me, because I just sort of feel that some people really deserve that, and it just, that's that Rasha part of me, I guess.
Well, we all have it, and it's such a hard thing to practice, but such a powerful thing when you're able to kind of master and work on. And I just want to make it clear again, because for me, this is something important. Never are you or I allowed to be treated like a shmata. There's something called chutzpah, and it's important, it's healthy, a good dose of it. But you have to separate, meaning if a person is acting wrong, you have to make that clear to them. It's actually a mitzvah in the Torah to rebuke them. It's a mitzvah to tell them what you did is wrong and to confront them. And I think I don't know if we mentioned it already in a previous chapter, but to approach them and to have a conversation with them. And that's actually part of the mitzvah of rebuke. And a favorite story I like sharing, I don't think I shared it on record, I've shared it in previous classes, is when the previous Rebbe, he had medical complications. He had MS and stroke. He was the Rebbe during the Holocaust. And besides for his physical body that was brutally tortured in Tsarist, in communist Russia in 1927 when he was in prison, he was just broken from the what was going on to his Hasidim and the entire Jewish world. So he had many problems. He had to go to a doctor once who had to inject a needle, a shot. And before, this was in the 40s, but they sterilized the needle to make sure it was clean. And he asked him why you're sterilizing it, and he said, because even if there's a little minute germ, and we all know that is I don't even know what the measurement of this, the size of our corona, COVID-19, is a nanogram. I don't even know the size, you can't even see it. But it's so small, but it could be so harmful to a person. So therefore, we have to make sure to sterilize it. And the way the previous Rebbe learned is that rebuke, picking a needle, meaning pinching another person, at times is needed and healthy, right? You need shots every now and then. They're important. But you need to make sure that it's extremely sterile when you're injecting. That pinch, that needle that you're poking in another person, that rebuke that you're going to give, you have to make sure that there's no resentment, anger, I don't know what the right word is, feeling of gratification when you're getting back at that person, because that's not why you're rebuking. The rebuke has to be fully from the soul, fully with love, really for the other person, wanting them to do better. And if you feel it's not going to be listened to, you're not allowed to rebuke. We'll get to that later on in Tanya. We're going to get to there. Chapter 32 is an incredible chapter of Tanya where it talks about absolute love. But that's not, I don't want to lose focus from what I'm saying here, because Robin, what you said is so spot on. You can't be treated like a shmata, but at the same time realize that it's not really the person doing it. It's coming from Hashem. The person chose to be the one to act on it. I mean, he doesn't know God's whole plan, and he just wants to get at you. But in truth, you have to separate the person from the action and realize that you still could love the person. And you actually have to thank them for what you got. It's something you have to work hard on practicing. And this week, even if it's just once or twice at a moment and where you could reflect and meditate on something that a person did to you and how you see a good that came out of it, and how you maybe don't want to actually verbalize your thank you to them yet, but say how almost if it wasn't for that person, I wouldn't be where I am today. And powerful stuff. So that concludes chapter 12. I'm really glad we got through it. If anyone has some, and Chantal, do I know you? Chantal? I don't know if you have the book in front of you, but thank you for listening in.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Good morning.
No, you don't know me. I don't know you, but I've heard a lot of wonderful things about you. A couple of people in your community are friends of mine, and that's how I heard about you.
Est-ce que tu parles en français aussi? Do you have a French accent?
Ah, moi, je suis française.
Alors, je peux donner la classe en français. Isabelle aussi, elle parle en français. Maybe we'll switch the class to French. I'm actually giving a Yiddish class at 12, so we could...
No, I'm Sephardi, so I don't know any I'm Sephardi.
Me
so
too. My mother's from Tunisia.
I'm from
Where are you from, Chantal?
Algeria.
Oh, beautiful. Okay, good.
From Morocco. Yeah. So
Nice.
right between Tunisia and Morocco.
Nice.
This is a fact. I do not have a book. I've been intrigued by Tanya a lot. So I just wanted to hear more, and I think I will continue. I do have questions about this topic of today, because it's been hardest for me, given past issues.
I'm sorry, yeah.
And I like to learn more about it. So thank you.
Of course.
Where
And
Where are you from, Rabbi?
Originally, I'm from Montreal.
Okay, but you don't have the Canadian accent.
You know, my mother's from Paris, and till today,
Okay.
my mother moved to Montreal, and when she got there from Paris, she wasn't able to understand the French that they were speaking in Canada, the French Canadian. So I still have the proper French, but honestly, I lost a lot of it. I every now and then I ask Isabel to speak to me in French so I could keep my French going, because I don't really speak much in French. But Chantal, I would ask you, on our website we have recordings of previous Tanya classes where I give a synopsis just so you're caught up on where we are holding a few, especially the chapter 12 classes. I gave some really analogies and stories to give a refresher in the background of Tanya, and really chapter 12 is a great part to jump in. So on our website, jewishnevada.com/virtual, and if you don't mind emailing me, I could just add you to our Tanya class and to get updates.
Wonderful, thank you. I will check it out.
I'm very glad. Thank you. So have a Bainani week. Work on this, even if you do it a little bit. I'm going to work on it because we're all in the same boat, striving to be a better person. And if you're able to do this, you're in tip-top shape. So strengthen your neshama, your godly soul, and you'll see wonders. So work on meditation. We'll learn some more meditations as we continue the book. And if anyone still wants to purchase the book, you can get it on Amazon, or I would actually recommend, I think from a Jewish store, it might be a little cheaper than Amazon if they mark it up. Although I think Diane told me that she got it for a reasonable price on Amazon. Anyway, I can help you with that.
Thanks so much, Rabbi. That was awesome.
You're welcome.
Thank
All right,
you. Merci beaucoup.
Merci. De rien. À tout à l'heure. Bye, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye, Isabel.